Even amongst the shocking examples of fanaticism and violence that emerged in the years of the Second World War, they stand out for a commitment to victory that disdained death itself. The Shinpū Tokubetsu Kōgekitai, Divine Wind Special Attack Unit, better known as the Kamikaze, were a last desperate grasp by a doomed nation that sought to stave off the inevitable by embracing the code of bushido, which saw self-sacrifice as a path to a divine beatitude amongst heroic ancestors. Even today, in Japan, they elicit both admiration and ambivalence. Whether they are seen as motivated by an intense love of nation or an insanity rooted in a twisted Oriental mysticism, as a phenomenon of a moment in history, they are as riveting as they are shocking. By 1944, Japan was fighting an increasingly desperate war with depleting resources. The carrier battles in 1942, particularly Midway, had inflicted irreparable damage on the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service. They were now incapable of putting together a large number of fleet carriers with well-trained air crews. In addition to Midway, the Solomon Islands campaign of 1942 to 1945, the New Guinea campaign of 1942 to 1945, and the Battle of Eastern Solomons, August 1942, had decimated the IJNAS veteran air crews, and replacing their combat experience proved impossible. Newer U.S.-made aircraft, such as the Grumman F-6F Hellcat and the Voight F-4U Corsair, outclassed and outmaneuvered Japan's fighters. Tropical diseases, as well as shortages of spare parts and fuel, made operations more and more difficult for the IJNAS. Japan was losing fighters faster than it could train their replacements, and the nation's industrial capacity was diminishing relative to that of the Allies. It was from these desperate circumstances that the Air Service began considering suicide attacks. According to some sources, Captain Motoharu Okamura, commander of the Tateyama base in Tokyo, as well as the 341st Air Group Home, was the first to officially propose kamikaze attack tactics. On June 15, 1944, with his superiors, he began investigations into the plausibility of intentional suicide attacks. Suicide attacks were not unknown. Previously, pilots whose aircraft had suffered severe damage had deliberately crashed into enemy targets to avoid being captured. The Bushido Code extolled death instead of defeat, capture, and shame, and was deeply entrenched in Japanese military culture. In August 1944, the Domain News Agency announced that a flight instructor, Takeo Tagada, was training pilots in Taiwan for suicide missions. One source claims that the first kamikaze mission occurred on September 13, 1944. A group of pilots from the Army's 31st Fighter Squadron on Negros Island decided to launch a suicide attack the following morning. First Lieutenant Takeshi Kosei and a sergeant were selected. Two 100-kilogram bombs were attached to two fighters, and the pilots took off before dawn, planning to crash into carriers. They never returned, but there is no record of a kamikaze hitting an Allied ship that day. The Japanese word kamikaze is usually translated as divine wind, and originally referred to the major typhoons that dispersed Mongol Koryo fleets who invaded Japan under Kublai Khan in 1274. Kamikaze aircraft were essentially pilot-guided explosive missions, purpose-built or converted from conventional aircraft. Pilots would attempt to crash their aircraft into enemy ships in what was called a body attack, in aircraft loaded with bombs, torpedoes, and other explosives. On October 17, 1944, Allied forces assaulted Suluan Island, beginning the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The Imperial Japanese Navy's 1st Air Fleet, based at Manila, was assigned the task of assisting the Japanese ships that would attempt to destroy Allied forces in Leyte Gulf. That unit had only 41 aircraft, 34 Mitsubishi's A6M-0 carrier-based fighters, 3 Nakajima B-6N Tenzan torpedo bombers, 1 Mitsubishi G-4M, and 2 Yokosuka P-1Y Jinja land-based bombers, and 1 additional reconnaissance aircraft. The 1st Air Fleet Commandant, Vice Admiral Takejiro Unishi, decided to form a suicide offensive force, the Special Attack Unit. On October 25, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, the Kamikaze Special Attack Force carried out its first mission. 5 A6M-0s, led by Lieutenant Yukio Seki, were escorted to the target by leading Japanese ace Hiroyoshi Nishizawa, where they attacked several escort carriers. 1-0 attempted to hit the bridge of the USS Kitkun Bay, but instead exploded on the port catwalk and cartwheeled into the sea. 2 others dived at USS Fanshawe Bay, but were destroyed by anti-aircraft fire. The last 2, Seki among them, ran at USS White Plains. Seki, however, under heavy fire and trailing smoke, aborted the attack on White Plains and instead banked toward USS St. Lo, diving into the flight deck, where his bomb caused fires that resulted in the bomb magazine exploding, sinking the carrier. By October 26, day's end, 55 kamikazes from the Special Attack Force had damaged 3 large escort carriers. In total, 7 carriers were hit, as well as 40 other ships. 5 sunk, 23 heavily damaged, and 12 moderately damaged. These early successes led to an expansion of the program, and over the next few months, over 2,000 aircraft made such attacks. Purpose-built kamikazes, as opposed to converted fighters and dive bombers, were also being constructed. Yokosuka MXY-7 Oka rocket-powered aircraft, launched from bombers, were first deployed in kamikaze attacks from March 1945. U.S. personnel gave them the derisive nickname Baka bombs. Baka is Japanese for idiot or stupid. The Nakajima Ki-115 Tsuzuri was a simple, easily built propeller aircraft with a wooden airframe that used engines from existing stocks. Its non-retractable landing gear was jettisoned shortly after takeoff for a suicide mission, recovered and reused. Obsolete aircraft, such as Yokosuka K-5Y biplane trainers, were also converted to kamikazes. It is said that when Vice Admiral Onishi first asked for pilots, every single man present volunteered. Japanese propaganda extolled this as proof that the men of Japan were willing to die for their country. However, the diaries and letters of the kamikazes themselves present a picture that is more muddled. The military reported that when Flying Ace Lieutenant Yukio Seki was asked to lead the kamikaze unit, he raised both hands and said, "Please do appoint me to the post." But Seki's comments in private suggest that he had only volunteered because he felt that he had no choice. Japan's future is bleak if it is forced to kill one of its best pilots, Seki bitterly told a war correspondent. "I am not going on this mission for the Emperor or for the Empire. I am going because I was ordered to." Later volunteers would be brutalized into accepting their suicide missions. One kamikaze pilot, Irokawa Deikishi, wrote in his diary that during his training he was routinely starved and beaten. His superiors would deny him food. If they even suspected he'd eaten, they'd beat him bloody. "I was hit so hard that I could no longer see and feel on the floor," he wrote. "The minute I got up, I was hit again. He hit my face 20 times, and the inside of my mouth was cut in many places by my teeth." Kamikaze pilots would be beaten for any type of disloyalty. Others described being ordered to memorize poems in archaic forms of Japanese, then being knocked to the ground every time they made a mistake. By the time the day came, any sense of free will they had or any desire to disobey orders would be erased. Despite the kamikaze's initial success, Allied defensive tactics quickly developed. Larger combat air controls were positioned further from the carriers than before. Lines of picket destroyers and destroyer escorts were positioned at least 80 kilometers from the main fleet body to provide earlier radar interception. And fighter patrols protected Allied fleets around the clock. More experienced, better trained Allied pilots flying superior aircraft found the poorly trained kamikaze pilots easy targets. Allied pilots became adept at destroying enemy aircraft before they struck ships. And Allied gunners using heavy 127mm anti-aircraft guns could destroy aircraft well before they were within range of the ship. As outlandish and even insane the special attackers may seem, it must be remembered that their emergence was not due to some naive Oriental mysticism, but rather a steadfast and brutal honesty about their circumstances. Sending inexperienced pilots in dilapidated planes against experienced American pilots in state-of-the-art planes launched from aircraft carriers capable of massive artillery barrages was essentially suicide. As such, it must be conceded that through their sacrifices, though ultimately futile, they lived their creed as few others have. This is Deviant Knowledge. Thanks for watching.